In this video, I'm going to show you how to harvest and process acorns for food. We're going to harvest and process the nut meat, and I'll make a coffee substitute and shockingly delicious molasses and ginger cookies. Cultures worldwide have used acorns as a staple food, especially during famine or grain scarcity. Once processed, acorns are versatile and easy to work with, making them a potential addition to your regular diet. You're going to wonder why you didn't harvest and consume them more often. However, acorns from the ground are tannic and may contain bugs, so they need proper processing. I'll show you a Native American trick to determine which ones have bugs and which one don't. So you're going to want to watch to the end to learn that and to understand how I process these to make them a delicious gluten-free flour and even roast them for a coffee substitute. Gather. First, I had to harvest acorns. Fortunately, in my state, there are over 20 species of acorn-yielding oak trees. Now, the acorn oak nuts vary significantly in size, shape, and tannin level. I started with these valley oak acorns and a coast live oak on the city prepping property. Unfortunately, this is also the point where I learned about the acorn weevil. This tiny beetle makes a hole in green acorns, lay its eggs, and then seals the hole with its feces. When the egg hatches, the larvae can eat the acorn nut meat, rendering it useless. While some say these larvae are edible as another protein source, I'm not that desperate or daring right now, so I needed to find a source that had fewer of these insects. Fortunately for me, I was able to drive up to a higher elevation, around 4,000 feet above sea level, and stumbled upon an Engelmann oak. The acorn is easily twice the size of the live or valley oak acorn, and the higher elevation, as I suspected, resulted in fewer acorn weevils. The first step in the process is to gather up as many acorns as you can, but avoid ones where you can clearly see the telltale dark spot or hole that indicates an acorn weevil was there before you. Float test. Step 2 is a Native American hack that will save you hours of time spent in frustration. That is to dump all your acorns into water. The ones that float have weevils in them, and the ones that sink to the bottom do not. This is the first reason that the Native Americans worked by the stream. They could simply dump the gathered acorns in a slow-moving section of the stream, and the ones with acorn weevils in them would float away. Now, the good acorns could be collected from the bottom of the stream. This hack worked exceptionally well. Most of the acorns I gathered in the valley were infested, as I had previously concluded. Of all the acorns that passed the test in this way, I would say that only about 1 in 100 had any sign of a weevil. Shell. Step 3 is to separate the nut meat from the shell. Some people roast them before doing this, but I don't think that's necessary. Now, allegedly, roasting helps to separate the papery coating from the nut a little better. That papery coating contains the majority of the tannins. I found that placing them in the oven at low heat didn't help with this process, and I didn't want to use high heat and break down the nutrition in the nut. I used a mallet and was able to separate the nut meat with a solid whack and the occasional use of a nut pick. Now, you're going to want to set aside a good chunk of time to do this. There's not really a shortcut here, but you hit it with a mallet or hammer to separate the shells from the meat and repeat. This is a very time-consuming process, but after a little bit short of 2 hours working alone, I was able to pull a little over 5 pounds of meat from the shells. I use the shells in my garden as a soil amendment or burn them in the fire pit. As soil amendment, they add tannins to the soil and aerate it, which can be beneficial to some plants. Processing. Step 4 is to process the nut material into smaller pieces. Now, you could grind it in between rocks as the Native Americans did, but I will leverage technology here. I gave the nut meat a few quick pulses in the blender to get it down to a smaller size that would have more surface area to work with. You don't want full-size nuts or even larger pieces than 1/4 inch because you want the water in the following process to be able to contact most of the nut meat. Now, at this point, you could put this in a sack and submerge it in the creek and come back in a week or two, as I used to, but I don't have the time for that. I used a standard kitchen cheesecloth and tied the corners together, and this gave me 2 chunks of pulverized material to work with. I had enough material to work with to create 2 balls of the flour. Leeching. Step 5 is leeching, which removes bitter tannins from the acorn flour. Start by placing your cheesecloth balls in a large container of cold water. The key is to ensure the water can freely circulate around the flour, allowing tannins to leach out. Change the water frequently, at least twice a day, until it runs clear. Alternatively, you can use heated or boiling water to speed up the leaching process. Boil the cheesecloth balls for 15 minutes, then discard the water and refill the pot with fresh water. Repeat this process several times, but keep in mind that hot water leaching is faster but may strip away more nutrients. I tried warm water. I tried soaking, and I found the best method was to work the bags with my hands while running water through them. In this way, I was able to massage the tannic dark liquid out of them. The tannins will temporarily stain your sink, but they do wash out. I would then soak it overnight in hot water, drain it the next day, then repeat the process with more agitation and more hot water. As the drain off cleared from a light brown to faint cloudiness, I would open the cheesecloth in a strainer and work the material through running water, mixing it with my hand and then physically squeezing out the liquid from the material. The whole process, it took me several days, and I don't think the water was running perfectly clear when I decided it was done. It was best described as slightly cloudy, but it wasn't brown. The tannins being leached out during the process, they're not going to kill you. Tannins are naturally in a lot of food we eat, such as tea, red wine, berries, pomegranates, chocolate, and nuts. But too many tannins, however, are bitter and can result in digestive problems or discomfort and can interfere with the body's ability to absorb calcium, zinc, and iron. Now, many cultures don't leach for very long, and the acorns retain their high starch content. People then use and store it in a paste format. I need it in a more dry flour form. This leaching process, it takes time. Once the water was cloudy but not brown, it was time to move it to the drying step. Drying. I wanted to determine if there was any substantial difference between freeze drying and simple dehydration, so I visually split the acorn mash between the dehydrator lined with parchment paper and my freeze dryer. Now, I dehydrated the acorn meal for about 2 days, and the comparison results were negligible. The freeze-dried version was a little lighter and finer, probably because more water was removed. It powdered more easily. It would keep longer as a result of the lower moisture content, but long-term storage wasn't really a concern for me. If I was going to long-term store acorns, I would do the float test and then simply dry them in the shell. Now, the tannins and watertight outer case will protect the oils in the nut from going rancid for a long time. That's how the squirrels store them, so it will work for us as well. The color was different between the freeze-dried and the dehydrated versions, but the taste was about the same. Now, once the mash is completely dry, the next step is to grind it into flour. The blender quickly pulverized the acorns into a fine powder, except for the golden color. It was indistinguishable from flour in grain size and texture. Before I did that, though, I took some in its rougher, larger form to make the coffee recipe that I'm going to show you next. You don't want to find powder when making coffee. Acorn coffee. Acorns can be roasted and ground to create a coffee-like beverage, offering a caffeine-free alternative. Now, historically, acorn coffee was made during the American Civil War, and the Germans made their own version during the World Wars, calling it ersatz coffee. Ersatz literally translates to substitute or replacement. The process is simple. Take your larger granules of acorn and put them in a cast iron pan. Turn the heat up and stir. Visually, you want them to turn a dark coffee color without too much burning. You don't want them completely black and charred, but you do want them to at least begin the roast process in order to coax out more flavor from the material. Keep them moving around the pan until they take on a darker color and avoid burning them all. After a few minutes, they will start to smoke, so you're going to want a stovetop fan or do this process outside. Now, you could probably do this with a less leach product with more tannins to get a fuller flavor. I turned off the heat when about half of everything in the pan had taken on a darker color because I didn't want to risk burning them. The larger granules are definitely better for this process. I made the coffee in an espresso machine and in a regular stovetop or campfire coffee maker. Here too, I did the process in 2 different ways to see if there were any differences that I might be able to determine for you. There weren't. They were about the same. And when prepared, acorn coffee has a nutty, slighter, sweet flavor and is rich in nutrients like antioxidants and minerals. If you are a coffee drinker, this has a lighter, less astringent taste with an almost toffee or caramel-like undertone. If it's all I had, I would definitely enjoy a cup of it. I see its real value in adding it to cut an existing coffee supply, thereby stretching it out all to last longer. Now, in that way, you could still get the caffeine and flavors of the coffee, but you would also gain the subtle flavor notes of the acorn. Acorn cookies. I decided to experiment with acorn flour and aimed to make molasses cookies, but I accidentally started making gingerbread. Halfway through, I adjusted the recipe to reduce the ginger and increase the molasses, which resulted in an amazing cookie with a delightful blend of molasses and nutty acorn flavor. Now, the cookies had a perfect consistency, crumbling when hot and hardening after a few days, ideal for dunking them in coffee. The acorn flour was indistinguishable from wheat flour, and everyone loved them. However, remember that acorn flour is a tree nut and should be avoided by those with nut allergies. To make these, mix together 1 1/2 cups melted butter with a 1/2 cup of molasses, 2 cups of sugar, and 2 eggs. Mix until all ingredients are well incorporated. Then add about 4 1/2 cups of acorn flour and 2 teaspoons of baking soda. Mix until no dry flour remains. I then grated and added 2 tablespoons of freshly grounded ginger from the garden. Mix this until all ingredients are combined. The consistency at this point will be a little wet feeling. I cover the bowl with plastic wrap and put it in a refrigerator for a few hours to let it rest and firm up a bit. I tried to roll this and use some small cookie cutters, but that proved to be too difficult. So I went instead to simply rolling the dough into small 1/2 inch balls. I placed these on parchment paper lined cookie sheets and put them in an oven preheated to 350 degrees. I baked them for 12 minutes, which was sort of a sweet spot that I found. When they came out of the oven, they crumbled easily when hot, and I transferred them carefully to a wire rack, and then they set up perfectly. This recipe made a little over 2 dozen of the best tasting cookies that you'll ever eat. So there you have it. If you need a flour or coffee substitute, you're looking to get a little more nutrition or gluten-free alternative, you may not need to look further than your nearest oak tree. The process is time-consuming and arduous, but the end result is a versatile and nutritious substitute that is rarely used these days, though whole cultures have survived on it as a staple in the past. If you're craving a cookie but the grid is down and there's no flour available, this should be your go-to alternative. The same is true for coffee. Let me know if you've ever tried Acorn flour and what you made from it if you did by leaving a comment below. For a complete printout of this content and the recipes, visit cityprepping.com/acorns. As always, stay safe out there.